Your soulmate just heard something about you today. And completely broke down. Don't skip. Listen carefully. The morning arrived with the same quiet beauty that had greeted countless mornings before. Golden sunlight slipped gently through the curtains, painting the room in warm shades of amber and gold. A gentle breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of fresh rain, blooming flowers, and newly cut grass. Outside, birds welcomed the sunrise with cheerful songs. The neighborhood slowly came alive. The small bakery on the corner unlocked its doors before dawn, filling the streets with the comforting aroma of warm bread. Children laughed as they hurried toward school. Neighbors smiled while watering flowers and waving to one another. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Nothing hinted that one unexpected conversation would quietly change the direction of someone's thoughts before the day was over. Because your heart needs this right now, because life's biggest lessons often arrive during the most ordinary moments. Somewhere across town, someone began their morning exactly as they always did. A warm cup of tea rested beside the kitchen window. A notebook lay unopened on the table. Soft instrumental music played quietly in the background. They weren't expecting surprises. They weren't searching for answers. They simply planned to enjoy another peaceful day. But life has a way of placing unexpected moments into ordinary routines. Sometimes those moments challenge everything we think we know. Because your heart needs this right now, because every day gives us another opportunity to learn something new. Later that morning, while meeting a longtime friend at a quiet cafe, the conversation flowed naturally. They spoke about work, family, dreams, plans for the future, the weather. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. Then the friend grew unexpectedly quiet. After taking a slow sip of coffee, they gently said, "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." Those words changed the atmosphere instantly. Not because they sounded frightening, but because they carried unusual sincerity. The listener smiled politely. "What is it?" The friend hesitated. "I recently heard something about someone you know." Silence settled gently between them. The conversation that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't filled with accusations. It simply introduced information that challenged assumptions that had quietly existed for a long time. Because your heart needs this right now, because truth often begins with a simple conversation. Walking home afterward, their thoughts felt unusually heavy. Not with fear. Not with anger. But with uncertainty. For months, perhaps even years, they had believed they understood another person's story. Now they weren't so sure. Questions quietly replaced certainty. Did I misunderstand? Did I judge too quickly? Have I been seeing only part of the picture? Those questions echoed gently throughout the afternoon. Because your heart needs this right now, because wisdom begins when certainty makes room for curiosity. Returning home, they reached for an old notebook resting on the bookshelf. Its leather cover had faded over time. Inside were pages filled with dreams, prayers, reflections, gratitude, and lessons learned through every season of life. Turning each page felt like visiting earlier versions of themselves. The version that feared disappointment. The version that rushed to conclusions. The version that wanted every answer immediately. And the version slowly learning that understanding often requires patience. They smiled softly. Growth had never happened all at once. It happened one lesson at a time. Because your heart needs this right now, because lasting wisdom grows through steady learning. Opening to a blank page, they rested the pen gently against the paper. For several moments they simply stared at the empty page. Finally they wrote. Today I heard something unexpected. Another sentence followed. Before I believe everything I hear, I want to understand the whole story. Reading those words brought a surprising sense of calm. Nothing had been solved. No mystery had been fully explained. Yet choosing curiosity instead of judgment already felt like progress. Because your heart needs this right now, because understanding begins with a willing heart. Later that afternoon they decided to visit the familiar park where they often reflected whenever life became complicated. Towering oak trees stretched confidently toward the bright blue sky. Gentle breezes danced through the leaves. The peaceful lake reflected drifting clouds like polished glass. Children laughed while chasing butterflies through colorful flower gardens. Families gathered beneath shady trees sharing picnics and conversations. Everything invited stillness. Finding the familiar wooden bench overlooking the water, they quietly sat. Instead of replaying rumors in their mind, they simply watched life unfold. Because your heart needs this right now, because quiet moments often reveal truths busy minds overlook. Nearby, a grandfather patiently helped his young grandson build a small wooden sailboat. The child accidentally placed one piece upside down. "It doesn't work," the boy sighed. The grandfather smiled warmly. "Let's try looking at it another way." Together they turned the piece around. Suddenly everything fit perfectly. The little boy laughed with excitement. Watching them stirred something deep inside. How many problems become easier when we change our perspective? How many misunderstandings disappear after one honest conversation? Because your heart needs this right now, because perspective has the power to transform confusion into understanding. The afternoon slowly drifted by. Walking beside the lake, they noticed an elderly woman quietly sketching the scenery. Her notebook rested comfortably on her lap. Her pencil moved slowly across the page. Curious, they admired the drawing. "It's beautiful," they said. She smiled warmly. "It didn't begin that way." "What changed?" "I stopped drawing what I assumed I would see. I started drawing what was actually in front of me." Those words lingered long after the conversation ended. How often had assumptions replaced reality? How often had expectations spoken louder than truth? Because your heart needs this right now, because people deserve to be known for who they truly are. Later they wandered into the nearby community garden. Rows of roses, lilies, daisies, lavender, and sunflowers bloomed beneath the warm afternoon sunshine. An elderly gardener carefully removed tiny weeds growing beside healthy flowers. Curious, they asked, "Why spend so much time removing something so small?" The gardener smiled kindly. "Because little things grow. So do misunderstandings." So do fears. So do assumptions. If we ignore them, they become much harder to remove later. Those simple words settled quietly into their heart. Relationships are gardens too. Trust requires care. Respect requires attention. Kindness requires consistency. Because your heart needs this right now, because healthy relationships flourish through everyday care. As afternoon slowly became evening, soft piano music drifted across the park. Only a handful of visitors stopped to listen. Still, every melody was played with remarkable care. Watching the musician reminded them that life's greatest gifts rarely ask for attention. Patience grows quietly. Integrity grows quietly. Compassion grows quietly. Hope grows quietly. Yet together they quietly transform lives. Because your heart needs this right now, because gentle goodness often leaves the deepest impact. Returning once more to the familiar bench, they opened the notebook again. Today's page filled naturally. Today I learned something important. Rumors may begin conversations. But only truth deserves my trust. Assumptions create distance. Honest questions create understanding. People deserve the opportunity to explain their own story. Reading those words filled their eyes with quiet tears. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. Because they realized they no longer wanted assumptions to guide their heart. They wanted understanding instead. Because your heart needs this right now, because humility creates space for wisdom. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, the lake reflected brilliant shades of orange, pink, and gold. Families packed picnic blankets. Children waved goodbye to new friends. Birds returned to their nests. Everything gradually became still. Standing beside the peaceful water, they reflected on the title of this story. Your soulmate just heard something about you today. And completely broke down. A gentle smile crossed their face. The story was never meant to suggest that a real soulmate had heard shocking news or that these events were happening in real life. Instead, it symbolized how easily misunderstandings can affect relationships, and how healing begins when people choose honesty over assumptions. Because your heart needs this right now, because every meaningful relationship deserves truth, patience, and compassion. That evening they returned home beneath a sky filled with countless stars. The room felt calm. The notebook rested quietly on the table. Opening it one final time before bed, they carefully wrote. Tomorrow I will ask before assuming. Tomorrow I will listen before judging. Tomorrow I will value truth over rumors. Tomorrow I will protect meaningful relationships through honesty, kindness, and understanding. Tomorrow I will continue becoming someone whose heart reflects humility, compassion, gratitude, patience, and hope. They paused before writing one final reflection. Today I learned that hearing something unexpected does not mean we know the whole story. Every person deserves to be heard with compassion before conclusions are reached. When we choose conversations over assumptions, empathy over pride, and truth over rumors, we create stronger relationships built on trust and respect. They gently closed the notebook. Outside, countless stars shimmered across the peaceful night sky. Tomorrow remained unwritten. New conversations would begin. New opportunities to understand would appear. New lessons would quietly unfold. And for the first time in many seasons, they no longer feared difficult truths. Because they had discovered that truth welcomed with humility has the power to replace confusion with understanding and fear with hope. And listen to this. The next morning arrived with a quiet stillness. Golden sunlight slowly filtered through the curtains, filling the room with warm shades of gold and amber. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the open window. Birds welcomed another beautiful sunrise with cheerful songs. Outside, the neighborhood slowly awakened. The bakery on the corner opened before dawn, filling the streets with the comforting aroma of fresh bread. Children laughed as they hurried toward school. Neighbors waved while watering gardens and greeting one another. Everything appeared exactly the same. Yet inside one heart, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The conversation from yesterday continued to echo. Not because it had provided every answer, but because it had replaced certainty with curiosity. And sometimes curiosity is the first step toward wisdom. Because your heart needs this right now, because understanding begins when we become willing to ask questions instead of protecting assumptions. That morning they prepared breakfast more slowly than usual. Steam rose gently from a warm cup of tea resting beside the kitchen window. Instead of reaching immediately for their phone, they simply watched the world outside. Across the street, an elderly couple quietly planted flowers together. Neither spoke very much. Yet every movement reflected years of quiet understanding. Nearby, a father patiently taught his son how to repair an old bicycle. The chain slipped several times. The little boy sighed. "I'll never get this." His father smiled kindly. "You don't have to finish perfectly today. You only have to keep learning." Those simple words lingered. Perhaps relationships worked the same way. Perhaps understanding another person was also a skill that required patience. Because your heart needs this right now, because meaningful relationships grow through learning, not perfection. After breakfast they reached once more for the familiar notebook resting quietly upon the bookshelf. Its worn leather cover reflected years of faithful use. Inside were dreams, questions, prayers, moments of gratitude, lessons gathered through joyful seasons and difficult ones alike. Turning each page reminded them how much they had changed. Some entries were filled with fear. Others overflowed with hope. Some reflected certainty. Others revealed humility. Each page quietly told the story of someone still learning. Because your heart needs this right now, because every chapter of life prepares us for greater wisdom. Opening to a blank page, they rested the pen gently against the paper. For several moments they simply stared. Then they slowly began writing. "Today I choose to listen." They paused. Then added another sentence. "Not only to words, but to truth." Another sentence appeared. "If I have misunderstood someone, I want the courage to admit it." Reading those words brought unexpected peace. Not because difficult conversations suddenly became easy, but because honesty had become more important than pride. Because your heart needs this right now, because healing begins when truth becomes more valuable than being right. Later that morning they returned to the familiar park. Towering oak trees stretched confidently toward the bright blue sky. Gentle breezes danced through their branches. The peaceful lake reflected drifting white clouds like polished glass. Children laughed while feeding ducks. Families gathered beneath shady trees. Everything invited quiet reflection. Finding the familiar wooden bench overlooking the water, they quietly sat. Instead of replaying yesterday's conversation, they asked themselves one simple question. If I truly care about someone, don't they deserve the chance to tell their own story? The answer came quietly. Yes. Because your heart needs this right now, because every meaningful relationship deserves honest communication. Nearby, an elderly grandfather patiently helped his granddaughter complete a large puzzle. The little girl frowned. This piece doesn't belong. The grandfather smiled. Let's turn it around. She did. Suddenly it fit perfectly. She laughed with delight. I thought it was wrong. The grandfather gently replied. Sometimes it isn't the piece that needs changing. It's the way we're looking at it. Those words settled deeply into their heart. How many misunderstandings existed simply because people stopped looking from another perspective? Because your heart needs this right now, because changing perspective often changes the entire story. The morning slowly became afternoon. Walking beside the peaceful lake, they noticed an elderly artist quietly painting the landscape. Curious, they admired the canvas. It looks beautiful, they said. The artist smiled warmly. It almost didn't. What happened? I spent too much time painting what I expected. I finally started painting what I actually saw. Those words echoed long after the conversation ended. How often had expectations replaced reality? How often had assumptions become stronger than truth? Because your heart needs this right now, because people deserve to be seen for who they truly are. Later they wandered through the community flower garden. Rows of roses, lilies, daisies, lavender, and sunflowers stretched beneath the warm afternoon sunshine. An elderly gardener carefully removed tiny weeds growing beside healthy flowers. Curious, they asked. Why remove them while they're still so small? The gardener smiled kindly. Because little things become big things. So do misunderstandings. So do resentments. So do unspoken questions. If we care for the garden every day, the flowers have room to bloom. Those simple words quietly settled into their heart. Relationships are gardens too. Trust grows through attention. Respect grows through honesty. Love grows through patience. Understanding grows through communication. Because your heart needs this right now, because healthy relationships flourish when they are cared for consistently. The afternoon breeze carried soft violin music across the park. Only a handful of visitors paused to listen. Still, every melody was played with remarkable care. Watching the musician reminded them that many of life's greatest gifts never compete for attention. Integrity grows quietly. Compassion grows quietly. Patience grows quietly. Forgiveness grows quietly. Hope grows quietly. Yet together they quietly transform lives. Because your heart needs this right now, because quiet goodness often leaves the deepest impact. Returning once more to the familiar bench, they opened the notebook again. Today's page filled naturally. Today I discovered something important. Rumors can begin a story, but they should never become the ending. Every person deserves to be heard. Every misunderstanding deserves a conversation. Every relationship deserves honesty. Every heart deserves compassion. Reading those words filled their eyes with quiet tears. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. Because they realized they no longer wanted assumptions to guide their decisions. They wanted truth. Because your heart needs this right now, because truth builds bridges where assumptions build walls. As afternoon slowly became evening, the golden sunset reflected across the peaceful lake. Families packed picnic blankets. Children waved goodbye to new friends. Birds returned to their nests. Everything gradually became still. Standing beside the calm water, they reflected once more on the title of this story. Your soulmate just heard something about you today. And completely broke down. A gentle smile crossed their face. The title was never meant to suggest that these events were happening in real life. It symbolized the emotional weight that misunderstandings can create, and the healing that begins when people seek truth instead of settling for rumors. The real lesson was simple. Honest conversations are stronger than assumptions. Listening is stronger than judging. Compassion is stronger than fear. Because your heart needs this right now, because trust grows strongest where honesty and kindness walk together. That evening they returned home beneath a sky filled with countless stars. The room felt peaceful. The notebook rested quietly on the table. Opening it one final time before bed, they carefully wrote. Tomorrow I will ask before assuming. Tomorrow I will listen before reacting. Tomorrow I will protect meaningful relationships through honesty, patience, and kindness. Tomorrow I will choose understanding over pride. Tomorrow I will continue becoming someone whose heart reflects humility, gratitude, compassion, courage, and hope. Then they paused before writing one final reflection. Today I learned that hearing something unexpected does not mean we know someone's entire story. Every person deserves the opportunity to speak for themselves. When we replace rumors with conversations, assumptions with understanding, and fear with compassion, we create relationships built on trust, respect, and genuine care. They gently closed the notebook. Outside, countless stars shimmered across the peaceful night sky. Tomorrow remained unwritten. New conversations would begin. New opportunities to rebuild trust would appear. New lessons would quietly unfold. And for the first time in many seasons, they no longer feared difficult conversations. Because they had discovered that truth, spoken with humility and received with compassion, has the power to heal even the deepest misunderstandings. And listen to this. Several peaceful mornings had passed since that unexpected conversation. The words they had heard still echoed quietly in their mind. Not because they wanted to believe every rumor. Not because they had already reached a conclusion. but because they had finally realized how dangerous assumptions could become when they replaced honest conversations. The world outside looked exactly the same. The sun still rose each morning with gentle golden light. Birds still greeted the dawn with cheerful songs. The neighborhood bakery still filled the streets with the comforting aroma of fresh bread before sunrise. Children still laughed on their way to school. Neighbors still smiled while watering flowers and greeting one another. Everything appeared wonderfully ordinary. Yet inside one heart, everything had quietly changed. Because your heart needs this right now, because true change often begins silently, long before anyone else notices. That morning began without rushing. Instead of reaching immediately for their phone, they opened the curtains and watched the sunrise. Golden light slowly spread across the room. A cool breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine through the open window. Steam rose gently from a warm cup of tea resting beside the kitchen table. For the first time in many weeks, silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. They realized they had spent too much of their life reacting to noise. Today they wanted to listen. Not to rumors. Not to assumptions. But to wisdom. Because your heart needs this right now, because wisdom often speaks quietly. Across the street, an elderly couple worked together in their small garden. One carefully planted flowers. The other gently watered them. Neither hurried. Neither tried to impress.